Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our live coverage of the latest mission from Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. Emil Robinson Smith will be conducting our commentary for the duration of this coverage. We're broadcasting, as we always do, from the Spaceflight Now News Bureau here at NASA's Kennedy Space Center. We're currently T-minus 58 minutes, 18 seconds and counting to the planned launch of the latest Falcon 9 rocket from SpaceX, with the next batch of Starlink V2 mini satellites getting ready to head up to low Earth orbit. You'll be forgiven if these views we're seeing this morning are a little more reminiscent of Vandenberg than of Cape Canaveral. Space Coast currently socked in with quite a bit of fog this morning that has been at varying levels of thickness. Our view of the vehicle assembly building here at the Kennedy Space Center has fluctuated from what you're seeing right now live to at times being able to more clearly see the NASA meatball logo on the right hand side of the building to just barely being able to make out that Artemis logo near the front entrance there. So quite low visibility at this point in the morning, but good conditions as far as weather constraints for launch are concerned. Talk a little bit more about that as we continue to roll on through the countdown here. Do want to thank the 250 of you who are with us live as we're getting things going this morning. I know it's an early time of the day, and for those that are up, you're probably in the midst of getting ready for work. Maybe a little bit early to be getting the kids ready for school, but whatever has you up and about, we appreciate you checking in with us, whether you just got us on as audio in the background or you're watching along with us this morning. We appreciate you being here. If you haven't already, you could do us a big favor just by clicking the like button and sharing the stream. Allows more folks to find their way into this live launch coverage as we continue to roll on through the count. Also want to thank our moderators in the live chat for helping us out this morning. Thanks to Jeff Hansen, Callisti Lee, and Aussie Space Girl for hanging out with us today. If you do happen to see any of the other mods cruise on in, be sure to give them a big ol' hello. Our Spaceflight Now editor, Stephen Young, running the technical operations of the broadcast this morning. Our photographer, Adam Bernstein, out and about, making sure our live cameras are set up and ready to go. Depending on the visibility, the Falcon 9 also standing by for some still photography as well. Michael Caine has this morning off, but if you're not following the fellas on X, you can find them over on the handles that you see there on the screen. Michael Caine at MD Caine Jr., Adam Bernstein at ABern NYC. While there, be sure to follow Spaceflight Now simply at Spaceflight Now. You can also find us on Threads, Facebook, as well as Blue Sky. Our friends Pete Carsons with Max Q Productions, as well as Chuck and Jen Briggs with C&J Images, are standing by in hopes of supporting our tracking coverage of this Falcon 9 rocket. However, the fog here at the press side and at the Cape is also permeating throughout the rest of the Space Coast as well, on down far south as Vieira and Melbourne, and a little bit further south as well, possibly down to Palm Bay and beyond. So they will do their best to support with tracking views, but it just might not be one of those picturesque launch days. We'll have to wait and see how things materialize over the course of the next 53 minutes and some change. Last little bit of housekeeping. If you have a comment or question about this mission or other happenings going on in the realm of space and spaceflight, you can use the YouTube Super Chat feature. Not only will he be giving us some interesting things to talk about as we continue on through the count, but you'll be supporting us with what we do here at Spaceflight now, and that is always greatly appreciated. Time now T-minus 53 minutes, 8 seconds and counting. As we are cruising on through the countdown this morning, let's go ahead and talk about the countdown timeline, the nominal events that we're anticipating as we get ready to see, well, see maybe a bit of a strained word this morning as we get ready to count down to the planned liftoff of this Falcon 9 rocket. We'll put it like that for now. At roughly T-minus 38 minutes is when the SpaceX launch director will verify that they are a go for prop load. SpaceX takes its poll electronically, so if they're in a good position to do so, they can take this poll early, but that's nominally speaking when that does happen. When fueling begins, it starts with loading of RP-1, or a rocket-grade kerosene, on board the Falcon 9's first and second stages. At the same time, liquid oxygen begins flowing on board the Falcon 9's first stage. T-minus 30 minutes, they begin loading a cryogenic helium onto the Falcon 9's first stage as well. Helium is important because it's used to pressurize the main propellant tanks during flight. Same will happen on the second stage a few minutes thereafter. T-minus 23 minutes is when second stage RP-1 load wraps up. And at T-minus 20 minutes and 50 seconds, when the strong back chill down process begins. That's when SpaceX is conditioning the feed lines prior to second stage liquid oxygen loading. Normally, I'd say we see that as the so-called big vent. However, again, being able to see much of anything is going to be touch and go here throughout the course of the morning, so we'll have to just wait and see how the morning materializes. Regardless, the vent process tapers off at around T-minus 16 minutes and 30 seconds, setting up second stage LOX load about 30 seconds after that. T-minus 7 minutes is when the chill down of the 9 Merlin engines gets underway. That process involves flowing a small amount of liquid oxygen through the plumbing and turbo pumps, helping to protect the engines from the risk of thermal shock and damage during the startup sequence. About 6 minutes before liftoff, the first stage kerosene tank is full. Then at T-minus 4.5 minutes, the strong back retract sequence gets underway. It starts with the clamp arms just beneath the payload fairings opening up, and then the transporter erector, or the strong back, reclines a few degrees away from the Falcon 9 rocket, and it stays in that position until liftoff. Here at the Cape, at that point of liftoff, it'll pull back in a much more rapid fashion to clear the way for the vertical climb of the Falcon 9. A little bit different than out at Vandenberg. T-minus 3 minutes, the first stage LOX tank is full. Same is true on the second stage about a minute after that, at which point the Falcon 9 is fully loaded with 1 million pounds of propellant. In the final 60 seconds, as we hear the call that the Falcon 9 is in startup, control of the countdown is handed over from the ground sequencer to the Falcon 9's onboard flight computers, and the propellant tanks are brought up to flight pressure. SpaceX launch director will give their go for launch T-minus 45 seconds. The engine ignition command is issued at T-minus 3 seconds, and if all 9 Merlin engines are healthy and ignite, the command will be given for the hold down clamps to release the Falcon 9 rocket for a T0 liftoff. Coming up this morning at 5:15 a.m. Eastern, 10:15 UTC, or T-minus 49 minutes and 30 seconds. Time now T minus 46 minutes, 11 seconds and counting. As I mentioned earlier, the weather forecast for launch not exactly in alignment with the visibility that we've got today. As far as the ability to lift off this Falcon 9 rocket from Pad 40 at the Cape, 45th Weather Squadron forecast a 95% chance of favorable weather at liftoff. Taking a look at the satellite view of the clouds here, you can see it's still kind of wispy conditions as far as cloud cover. It's this fog that's really blanketing the Space Coast and knocking down visibility to between a quarter of a mile to 3 miles at best. Liftoff winds very calm this morning, ranging between 4 to 8 miles per hour, so fairly still. You can see not much movement with the American flag there at the countdown clock. No constraints listed as far as additional weather watch items, and all the additional risk criteria are rated low on a scale of low to moderate to high. So a pretty good morning as far as SpaceX's ability to launch, but our ability to see the launch, well, that's something quite different altogether. Time now T minus 44 minutes, 12 seconds and counting. As SpaceX is preparing to launch its latest Falcon 9 rocket, which will be the 15th of the year so far. Let's go ahead and talk about where this Falcon 9 is going to be headed once it leaves the pad. Let's talk a little trajectory, shall we? The mission on tap today, Starlink 12-3, as has been the case with missions as part of the 12th group of Starlink satellites. This too will be heading in a southeasterly path once it leaves the pad there. Space Launch Complex, or SLIC 40 at the Cape. Following stage separation, the first stage booster, B-1069, will follow that red arc and target a landing on one of SpaceX's 3 drone ships. 2 of them are based here on the East Coast, and the one on tap today is just read the instructions. B-1069 will be making its 21st launch and landing attempt today. If successful, this will mark the 108th booster landing for this particular drone ship and the 404th booster landing for SpaceX to date. SpaceX is working on certifying its first stage boosters for up to 40 flights apiece. Same is true with their payload fairings, which will splash down in the waters of the Atlantic Ocean under the support of steerable parachutes. And as SpaceX has noted previously, they save about $6 million per recovery effort, so it's an important part of their business model to try and retrieve these as often as possible and turn them around for future use. They're brought aboard one of these recovery vessels and then brought back over to Hangar X here at the Kennedy Space Center, where they are refurbished and turned around for future flights. SpaceX has been working on consolidating its facilities and processes to that one central location at Hangar X. Now T-minus 41 minutes, 6 seconds and counting. I was remiss for not mentioning this at the top of the broadcast, but do want to give a broad thank you to our channel member community for making these live launch opportunities possible for us. So thanks to folks like My Honey, Joni Mahoney, Butterfly, Coased M, of course, all of our wonderful moderators, Sulfur for Lunch, and many others. Channel membership comes with a number of perks, including discounts at our online shop, that is shop.spaceflightnow.com. Access to member-only videos here on YouTube, access to our members-only Discord server, and of course the ability to watch all of our live launch liftoff moments from here in the Cape in 4K. Currently T-minus 39 minutes, 12 seconds and counting. We're just about a minute away from the nominal point of when SpaceX will make the call on the start of prop load. Time now, T minus 35 minutes, 48 seconds and counting. In roughly 30 seconds or so, SpaceX should be beginning the process of fueling its Falcon 9 rocket. It's going to be a little hard to discern this one, as typically with its Starlink missions, SpaceX has stopped publicizing when it begins fueling its Falcon 9 rocket, so we've generally speaking relied on visual cues, and the building of the frost line has an indication that the supercold densified liquid oxygen is flowing on board the Falcon 9's first stage. That let us know that fueling is in fact moving forward. That, of course, augmented by sight of the so-called big vent. But given the density of the fog this morning, it is highly probable that we will see neither of those, as tanking actually is occurring. Given all of that, and the fact that SpaceX has not issued mission audio for its more, I'll say, nominal missions, things like Starlink flights, in some time, we will essentially have to go off of the countdown clock and let you know that these events as they come about are what is more than likely happening, but it'll be difficult to say with absolute certainty since we don't have a good visual on the rocket and won't until the final few minutes of the count when the paddle views become available. So if you think of this more in the context of, say, our coverage of a Vandenberg mission, it'll be somewhat akin to that, although we are still hoping to be able to have some level of visibility on the rocket once it does lift off from the pad and the 9 Merlin engines do illuminate the fog. And we'll, of course, bring you any and all views that we're able to capture with our tracking cameras scattered around the launch area. Just trying to set realistic expectations for what we can expect with today's countdown. At this point, we're T minus 32 minutes, 48 seconds and counting. Taking a look back at the vehicle assembly building, you can just barely make out the entrance to that facility there. You see that little row of windows just to the center right of the frame here near the bottom. That's the Launch Control Center, which juts out away from and near the VAB, but the vast majority of the big building itself hardly visible this morning. That, of course, is less than a mile from where we are here at the press site. Just to give you an idea of how dense the fog is today and really just give you an illustrated view of what we can expect to see or more than likely not see from the Falcon 9 flight this morning. Not exactly what you would call a Chamber of Commerce kind of a day, unfortunately. But at this point, the counterfall is going well with fueling of the Falcon 9 rocket. RP-1, or the rocket-grade kerosene, is flowing now on board the Falcon 9's first and second stages. At the same time, liquid oxygen also flowing on board the Falcon 9's first stage. In just about a minute, SpaceX will also begin loading that cryogenic helium onto the Falcon 9's first stage as well. to provide some additional distance context as far as what we're seeing right now, that Launch Control Center, the LCC that I mentioned a moment ago, it's roughly a quarter of a mile from where we are now. So when I was mentioning from the 45th Weather Squadron's forecast, the visibility from the fog being between quarter of a mile to 3 miles, well, there you go. That's a quarter of a mile for you folks. Checking in with our live chat here. Want to thank a few folks for their support. Thanks to channel member and moderator Jeff Hansen for a $5 super chat. Appreciate you, Jeff. He says, thank you, Will, and everyone at Spaceflight now for bringing us these broadcasts. Thanks for the kind words, Jeff. Also, thanks to Sulfur for Lunch for being a member with us for now 6 months at the mission specialist level. It says, halfway done, heading for year 1. And another one of our mods, Aussie Space Girl, also marking a membership milestone, having been with us for nearly 2 years, hitting that 23-month mark. It says, best launch channel around. Appreciate that, Stephanie. Time now, T-minus 26 minutes, 55 seconds and counting. Let's talk about the payload that's flying on board this Falcon 9 rocket today. A batch of 21 Starlink satellites heading up to low Earth orbit. 13 of those feature direct-to-cell capabilities. This morning's flight will be the 9th dedicated Starlink launch of the year so far. There's also been one rideshare Starlink mission in 2025. Each of these satellites clocks in at about, well, actually there's a little bit of question on the weight of these, since last year SpaceX noted that they introduced what they call the optimized V2 mini Starlinks. But the classic version clocks at about 1,760 pounds or 800 kilograms. The optimized version, though, that's the stat you see there on your screen, about 1,267 pounds or about 575 kilograms. There's been at least one mission this year in which it appears as though SpaceX launched a batch of these optimized V2 minis, although the company hasn't commented on if in fact that was what happened during that flight or how often SpaceX may have launched the optimized version of its Starlink satellites. Either way, once they have their solar panels unfurled, they have a wingspan of about 100 feet or 30 meters. They use argon Hall thrusters for in-orbit maneuvering. They're built in Redmond, Washington, which is near Seattle, and they'll be deployed at about 180 miles or 291 kilometers in altitude at a 43 degrees inclination. Talk a little bit about the V2 minis compared to the previous version of the Starlink satellites. They have about 4 times the capacity. They introduced E-band for backhaul. They feature upgraded phased array antennas. They're about 2.6 times heavier than the Starlink version 1.5 satellites. And as mentioned, they use those argon Hall thrusters for on-orbit maneuvering. Here's an artist rendering of what the V2 minis look like in low Earth orbit, connected with the laser mesh. Here's a real image of a Starlink V2 mini satellite as captured by the company HEO Robotics in partnership with Black Sky. And to give you an idea of what the argon Hall effect thrusters look like, here's one of those in a test environment. Of course, the V2 minis were introduced by SpaceX originally as a stopgap between the version 1.5 satellites and a way to keep deploying Starlink satellites until its Starship rocket is capable of delivering the now much larger, what SpaceX calls the version 3 satellites to low Earth orbit. As many of you will likely recall, SpaceX was intending to deploy some dummy Starlink satellites from its Flight 7 Starship upper stage. However, for those who were watching that mission or caught up with the coverage after the fact, ship never made it through the course of its first burn, and those dummy Starlinks were never deployed. Because it was a suborbital flight, though, those dummy Starlinks would have followed the same suborbital trajectory of ship had it been able to nominally complete its mission. And they would have splashed down in the waters of the Indian Ocean. Now T-minus 20 minutes, 30 seconds and counting. At this point, the so-called big vent should be in swing out of the pad. Again, because the fog is so dense and you can barely see the vehicle assembly building, which is comparatively pretty well lit and less than half a mile away from us here at the press site. It would be nigh impossible to see the big vent out of the pad, which is several miles away from the KSC press site. But the venting will continue for about the next 3-ish minutes, concluding about T-minus 16 minutes and 30 seconds prior to the beginning of second stage liquid oxygen loading. Time now T-minus 18 minutes, 29 seconds and counting. As we are awaiting the launch of this Falcon 9 rocket on the Starlink 12-3 mission, let's go ahead and talk about SpaceX's workhorse vehicle, the Falcon 9 rocket, using a little bit of graphical representation since, unfortunately, the fog is preventing us from seeing the genuine article at this moment in time. But the Falcon 9 stands about 70 meters or 229 feet tall with a diameter of 3.66 meters or 12 feet. The majority of that made up by the Falcon 9's first stage. B-1069 has flown 20 times before, looking for flight number 21 today. At the base of the first stage are 9 Merlin engines, which burn a rocket-grade kerosene and liquid oxygen, producing 1.7 million pounds of thrust. Around the engine compartment are black carbon fiber landing legs that are used to land the first stage on the drone ship. Again, today, SpaceX is using the drone ship called Just Read the Instructions. Above the first stage is the inner stage. This is a composite structure consisting of an aluminum honeycomb core, which is surrounded by carbon fiber. On the image on the right-hand side of your screen, you can see the deployable hypersonic grid fins. These are titanium winglets that provide stability and steering for the Falcon 9 as it comes back through the atmosphere, tail first like a big old dart towards the drone ship. At the top of the inner stage are 3 mechanical latches that attach to the second stage. That first stage main engine cutoff. High-pressure helium is used to release those latches, and 4 pneumatic pushers ensure a clean separation. Second stage engine nozzle is also housed safely inside the inner stage adapter until stage separation. Speaking of that second stage, the upper stage of the Falcon 9 rocket powered by a single modified Merlin engine called a Merlin vacuum engine, or an MVac engine. It's equipped with a large nozzle which is optimized for burns in the vacuum of space, hence the name. It produces more than 220,500 pounds of thrust, and it will be fired twice on today's flight, placing the 21 Starlink satellites into their intended orbit. The MVac engine burns the same propellant mix, that being RP1 and LOX, like the first stage. Following Starlink deployment, there will be a third burn of the upper stage engine, or a deorbit burn, driving the upper stage back into the atmosphere, where it's designed to burn up and help eliminate the risk of creating any unnecessary space debris on this mission. Finally, at the top of the Falcon 9 stack are the payload fairings that encapsulate the 21 Starlink satellites. The fairing halves are made up of a carbon composite material and stand 13.1 meters or 43 feet tall and are 5.2 meters or 17.1 feet in diameter. 2 fairing halves will be recovered a little bit further downrange from where the first stage lands on the drone ship. They splash down under steerable parachutes.
Falcon, Atlas, Vulcan, the space shuttle, any vehicle really, including Starship, is water.
Time now, T minus 11 minutes, 32 seconds and counting. Coming up here in just a few minutes, SpaceX will begin chilling the 9 Merlin engines at the base of the Falcon 9 first stage, preparation for their ignition. They'll flow a small amount of liquid oxygen through the plumbing and turbo pumps, which will help protect them from the risk of thermal shock and damage during that startup sequence. Taking a quick look at our live chat here, I want to thank a few folks for their support. Our thanks to Mark Potachnik for gifting 5 Spaceflight Now memberships, and to our moderator, Callisti Lee, for gifting 10 as well. So to our 15 newest channel members, welcome aboard. We're glad to have you with us. If you haven't already, be sure to thank Callisti and Mark in the live chat, and we hope you decide to stick around with channel membership. As I mentioned, the Falcon 9 first stage booster being used today, B1069, is preparing to make its 21st flight. Before that happens, though, let's go ahead and step back through time, talk about where it's been before we see where it goes next. First launch B-1069 was back on December 21st of 2021 when it sent up a Cargo Dragon spacecraft on its way to the International Space Station. That was SpaceX's 24th Commercial Resupply Services, or CRS, mission. That was followed up by a Starlink launch, Starlink 4-23 on August 22nd. Next up on October 15th of 2022 was the launch of the Hotbird 13F satellite. It and another satellite from Eutelsat would go on to replace the Hotbird 8, 9, and 10 satellites at the company's 13 degrees east position. Fourth launch for this booster was on December 8th of 2022. That was launch number 15 for the company OneWeb, sending up a batch of its satellites for its internet constellation. Launch number 5 came on February 2nd. That was the Starlink 5-3 mission. Next up was a launch for one of SpaceX's longest-standing customers, Luxembourg-based SES. That was a launch of satellites 18 and 19, lifting off on March 17th. And then we're off to Starlink land with basically everything from that point on to present day. We had Starlink 5-6 on May 4th, Starlink 5-12 on June 23rd, 6-9 on August 11th, 6-19 on September 30th, 6-28 on November 18th, 6-36 on December 29th, 6-39 on February 25th, 6-47 on April 5th, 6-57 on May 6th, 10-1 on June 8th, 10-9 on July 27th, 8-10 on August 31st, 10-8 on October 26th, and most recently, Starlink 6-66, lifting off on November 21st of 2024. That most recent flight coming just 75 days ago. One of the longer gaps between flights for this particular booster, coming on the heels of its shortest turnaround between Starlink's 10-8 and 6-66. Only 26 days apart between those two missions. Now 75 days later, B-1069 back again in the fold, awaiting liftoff coming up here in just a little bit more than 7 minutes. T-minus 7 minutes and counting. At this point, SpaceX should be conditioning those engines. Again, we're hedging our callouts just a little bit since SpaceX did not give notification for the start of fueling, which is fairly typical at this point for the company with its Starlink missions, or pretty much anything that's not a customer flight. But because we don't have good visibility on the rocket given the level of fog, we're going off of our timeline here for callouts. And as we pass the 6-minute mark, the first stage kerosene tank should also now be full. Now T minus 4 minutes, 48 seconds and counting. Are now getting pad level views of the Falcon 9 rocket. Not much better, honestly, than what we're seeing out here. Again, feeling very Vandenberg-like.
Strawback retract sequence has started.
Good call from SpaceX. A little bit of housekeeping here. You'll note the countdown clock in the upper right-hand corner of the screen. A little bit different than what you're seeing from the SpaceX feed. Reason being that our clock is in real time. What's coming in from SpaceX is on a slight delay. Normally that difference wouldn't play into our coverage until we are relying only on the SpaceX onboard cameras. However, given the level of fog, that point in time may come sooner than is ideal from here at the Cape. So when we do make the cutover, we'll be making the callouts of events based on SpaceX's timeline of events, since we'll be relying on the flight of its Falcon 9 rocket as it's seeing it. So, for instance, as we pass the 3-minute mark, where this may be the most jarring to viewers, and just to lay the cards on the table here, if our visibility from here at the press site and from our other tracking cameras is entirely snuffed, we may very quickly turn to the SpaceX onboard cameras. So you may see a little bit of a jarring adjustment.
Stage 1 lock slot is complete.
As the rocket appears closer to the pad at liftoff than it will normally be based off of our real-time clock. So, a lot to throw at you, just giving you some table settings, if you will, as we're getting ready to see the launch of this Falcon 9 rocket here. Now just a little more than 2 minutes away. First stage liquid oxygen tank is full. We are waiting for a similar call on the second stage. We're now less than 2 minutes to lift off in real time.
Stage 2 lock slot is complete.
With that call, the Falcon 9 is now fully loaded with 1 million pounds of propellant. With a close-up view, we may be able to see a little bit of variation in the fog. That'll help illustrate the ground gas closeouts.
Gas closeouts.
Good call there from SpaceX. Now it's a little more than a minute away from liftoff in real time.
Falcon 9 is in startup.
Good call. We are now just awaiting for the SpaceX launch director to give their go for launch.
Launch director, go for launch.
And with that call, 30 seconds away from liftoff in real time. Again, as we are looking for views from our tracking cameras, we'll make that call based off of the real-time events. And if we need to pivot very quickly to the SpaceX onboard cameras, we will do so then. Here we go in 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. We should have ignition. And we have a liftoff by the glow. It appears the Falcon 9 has lifted off, although the views are very fogged in here. But we're hearing the rumble of the 9 Merlin engines on the base of the Falcon 9 rocket, confirming a good liftoff of the Falcon 9. Very difficult tracking this morning, but our Adam Bernstein has got it in our tracking cameras here at the press site. Now approaching a minute and a half into flight.
Q.
The call for max Q at the point of greatest aerodynamic pressure on the vehicle. Soon we'll be hearing the call for MVAC chill.
MVAC chill has started.
With that call out, the upper stage engine is now being thermally conditioned prior to the start of its burn. As we approach the 2-minute mark, we're going to see a few events in fairly rapid succession here. We'll see first stage main engine cutoff, or MECO, at about T plus 2 minutes and 25 seconds. That'll be followed by stage separation, and then the ignition of that Merlin vacuum engine. Payload fairing is expected to be deployed about a little bit after the 3-minute mark.
Main engine cutoff.
Stage separation confirmed.
MVAC ignition.
All good call-outs from SpaceX. With good separation, you can see those hypersonic grid fins now being deployed on the Falcon first stage booster. Coming upon the deployment of the payload fairings here in the next few seconds.
Fairing separation confirmed.
Those Starlink satellites now exposed to the vacuum of space for the first time on this mission. Now a little more than 3.5 minutes into flight based off the SpaceX timeline of events. Now more than 4 minutes into flight. So far appearing to be a nominal Falcon 9 mission this Tuesday morning. The first of 2 that SpaceX has planned on tap for today. Coming up next with the Starlink 12-3 mission, we're looking for the beginning of the first stage entry burn. Set to begin just a little more than a minute from now based off of the SpaceX timeline. That burn lasting roughly 26 seconds in total. Nice view of sunrise just off of the edge of the Falcon 9 first stage booster. Coming up here on the start of the entry burn, where 3 of the Merlin engines on the base of the first stage booster will come back to life and begin to dramatically slow the vehicle down.
Stage 1 FTS is saved.
Stage 1 entry burn startup. Stage 1 entry burn shutdown.
With the conclusion.
Stage 2 FTS is saved.
With the conclusion of that entry burn, we're now awaiting the start of the landing burn, set to begin per SpaceX at about T plus 7 minutes and 46 seconds. The booster is expected to land on the drone ship called Just Read the Instructions a little bit after the 8-minute mark.
Stage 1 transonic.
As the first stage booster now traveling below the speed of sound, we're approaching the ignition of one of those Merlin engines at the base of the Falcon 9 booster for the landing burn.
Stage 1 landing burn.
Stage 2 terminal guidance.
Stage 1 landing leg deploy. Stage 1 landing confirmed.
And for a 21st time, B-1069 has landed safely.
Back shutdown.
And with the conclusion of that first burn on the upper stage, Falcon 9 second stage has entered into a parking orbit where it will coast until about T plus 53 minutes, 59 seconds. There will be a brief 2-second burn to help circularize the orbit. Then the Starlink satellites are expected to be deployed at about T plus 1 hour, 5 minutes, and 8 seconds post liftoff. Unfortunately, not the most picturesque of the launches that we've seen so far this year, but that's just the way the cookie crumbles sometimes. Before we go ahead and get to our mission stats as they currently stand, I want to thank channel member Norman Reitzel for $2 super chat and for marking 30 months with us now as a channel member at the mission specialist level, who pre-liftoff says, wow, this does look like Vandenberg. And boy, it sure did. Well, pretty liftoff or not, we have a good liftoff and landing of the Falcon 9 first stage booster. So let's go ahead and take a look at our mission stats as they currently stand from SpaceX. This was the 21st flight of that particular booster, B-1069. That marked the 432nd Falcon 9 booster Falcon 9 launch to date. This is the 15th Falcon flight of 2025, the 376th Falcon booster reflight, or the launch of a booster that has flown at least once. No Falcon Heavies on the board yet. This was the 15th orbital launch for SpaceX of the year so far. The 139th orbital launch from the company within the last 365 days. This was the 230th SpaceX orbital launch from Pad 40 and the 284th overall orbital launch from this pad as well. Taking a look at the bar chart, here's where we currently stand on the year compared to years past. Moving on to some recovery stats, this was the 108th booster landing on the drone ship called Just Read the Instructions. Marked the 323rd SpaceX drone ship landing and the 404th overall booster landing for SpaceX to date. Finally, with some industry stats, this was the 11th orbital launch from Florida on the year, the 16th from U.S. soil, 16th from U.S. rocket company, and the 23rd orbital launch attempt from around the globe. So far, all of them have gotten their payload safely to orbit, so here's where our pie chart currently stands. Some may be wondering where that orbital launch success stands when you factor in the issue that India had with its payload for its first launch of the year. According to the Indian Space Research Organization, the payload was deployed correctly. However, the propulsion issue came about following deployment, and so it's not able to raise itself to its correct operating orbit. But the payload was delivered to where it was supposed to be, so we will count that as a nominal deployment and a good flight from India. With that, I did mention there's one more SpaceX Falcon 9 launch that is on tap for later today. That is a launch for the company Maxar and their latest pair of Worldview Legion Earth imaging satellites. SpaceX is targeting a 2-hour window that opens up this evening at 6:07 p.m. Eastern, 23:07 UTC. So be sure to subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, ring that bell. That way you don't miss that live launch coverage when that begins. And hopefully, fingers crossed, the fog will not have rolled into the Space Coast at that point, and we'll actually get to see the liftoff of that Falcon 9 rocket. Have a better chance on that one, though. It's lifting off from Launch Complex 39A here, so comparatively much closer than Pad 40. Want to thank our friends Chuck and Jen Briggs with CNJ Images, P. Carsons with Max Ski Productions for being on standby in the hopes that the fog did break enough to track the Falcon 9. Turned out to not be the case, but that's the way it goes sometimes. Our thanks to our photographer Adam Bernstein. You can find him at ABurnNYC on X. Appreciate him for tracking the Falcon 9 as best as one can expect to, given the conditions. Thanks to our Spaceflight Now editor, Stephen Young, for running the technical operations of the broadcast. Most importantly, thanks to you for wherever you're watching from. And a final tip of the cap as well to our moderators, Felicity Lee, Jeff Hansen, and Aussie Space Girl. For all of us here at Spaceflight Now, I'm Will Robinson Smith. Remember, be good to yourselves, be good to others. We will see you next time, folks. And until then, bye-bye.